Hey, folks, it's your host, the guy who's allergic to bad economic policy, and let me tell you, I'm breaking out in hives this week. Buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the latest economic dumpster fire, courtesy of our friends in Washington, D.C. That's right, today's episode is all about Elon Musk, the Federal Reserve, and a $2.5 billion interior design scandal that'll make your wallet weep and your blood boil. Grab your popcorn, because this is Boss Economics World, where we roast the policies and politicians dragging our economy into the gutter. Alright, folks, let's set the scene. Billionaire extraordinaire Elon Musk, yes, the guy who spends his days tweeting memes, launching rockets, and apparently moonlighting as the federal government's efficiency guru, dropped a bombshell on April 30, 2025. Speaking from the White House, Musk floated the idea of sending his so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, because of course it's called DOGE, to the Federal Reserve. Why? Because the Fed is blowing a cool $2.5 billion of taxpayer money on renovating its Washington, D.C. headquarters. You heard that right, $2.5 billion to spruce up their offices, all while the economy is teetering on the edge of a cliff. Now, before we dive into the juicy details, let's take a step back and ask the million-dollar question, or, in this case, the $2.5 billion question, how did we get here? How is it possible that the central bank, the very institution tasked with keeping our economy stable, is funneling billions into what Musk cheekily called an interior designer project, while inflation is still haunting Main Street, interest rates are squeezing businesses, and the Fed itself is running at a loss? Spoiler alert, it's a masterclass in government mismanagement, and we're about to break it all down, layer by layer, from the surface-level absurdity to the deep, systemic rot at the core. Let's start with the headlines, because this is the kind of story that makes your average Joe and Jane on Main Street want to scream into the void. The Federal Reserve, the institution that's supposed to be the guardian of our monetary system, is spending $2.5 billion on a multi-year headquarters renovation. The Fed's excuse? Oh, just the usual, rising costs of building materials and labor, thanks to the inflation they helped fuel in the first place. Irony, thy name is Jerome Powell. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear $2.5 billion, I don't think necessary office upgrades. I think private island or gold-plated yacht. For context, $2.5 billion could fund the annual budget of a small country, or, closer to home, it could cover the cost of providing free school lunches to every public school kid in America for years. But no, the Fed decided that what America really needs is a shinier central bank headquarters. Priorities, right? And here's the kicker, the Fed doesn't even rely on congressional appropriations to fund its operations. It pays for itself through income generated by the securities on its balance sheet. But here's the problem, thanks to rising interest rates, which, by the way, the Fed itself sets, the Fed has been running at a loss. That's right, folks, the central bank is in the red. In 2023 and 2024, the Fed recorded operating losses, meaning it's no longer sending billions in profits to the U.S. Treasury to help narrow the federal budget deficit. Instead, it's racking up shortfalls, and apparently spending billions on renovations while doing so. Talk about tone deaf. Now, let's zoom out a bit, because this $2.5 billion renovation scandal isn't just a standalone clown show, it's a symptom of a much bigger problem. The Federal Reserve, under Jerome Powell's leadership, has been fumbling the ball on monetary policy for years, and this latest fiasco is just the cherry on top of a very messy economic cake. First, let's talk about inflation, because it's the elephant in the room. Remember 2021, when inflation started soaring, and the Fed told us it was transitory? Yeah, turns out, transitory meant a multi-year nightmare for American households. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index, CPI, rose by 7.8% in 2022, the highest annual increase since 1981. Fast forward to 2025, and while inflation has cooled somewhat, it's still hovering around 3.5%, well above the Fed's 2% target. For the average family, that means higher prices for groceries, gas, and rent, all while wages struggle to keep up. And guess what? The Fed's renovation costs ballooned precisely because of the inflation they failed to control. Higher costs for building materials and labor. That's inflation, baby. So, in a twisted way, the Fed's own policy failures are partly to blame for the $2.5 billion price tag. It's like setting your house on fire and then complaining that the fire department's hose is too expensive. Next up, let's talk interest rates, because this is where the Fed's mismanagement really hits home for businesses and families alike. In an effort to tame inflation, the Fed has been jacking up interest rates since 2022. As of April 2025, the federal funds rate sits at 5.25%, the highest level in over 2 decades. Now, higher interest rates are supposed to cool down an overheating economy, but here's the problem, they're also choking small businesses, stalling housing markets, and making life miserable for anyone with debt. Take the housing market, for example. According to the National Association of Realtors, existing home sales in the U.S. plummeted by 25% between 2021 and 2024, thanks to sky-high mortgage rates. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate hit 7.8% in late 2023 and has barely budged since, pricing out millions of would-be homebuyers. Meanwhile, small businesses, the backbone of the American economy, are getting crushed by borrowing costs. The National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, reported in March 2025 that 35% of small business owners cited high interest rates as their top concern, with many unable to expand or even stay afloat. So, while the Fed is busy spending billions on its headquarters, Main Street is suffocating under the weight of high interest rates. And what does Jerome Powell have to say about it? Well, if Trump's recent comments are any indication, Powell's leadership is always too late and wrong. Harsh? Maybe. Accurate? You bet. Now, let's get to the political angle, because this is where things get really spicy. Elon Musk's suggestion that his DOGE team should examine the Fed isn't just a random billionaire flex, it's part of a broader push by the Trump administration to exert more control over the central bank. Trump has been openly critical of Powell, even musing about firing him in April 2025, before backtracking, because of course he did. And now, with Musk's DOGE team rummaging through sensitive government data across federal agencies, the Fed's independence is under threat. Why does this matter? Because the Fed's independence is supposed to be sacrosanct. The central bank needs to make monetary policy decisions based on data and economic principles, not political pressure. But with Musk's team sniffing around and Trump itching to meddle, investors are getting jittery. According to a Bloomberg survey in April 2025, 68% of institutional investors said they were concerned or very concerned about political interference in the Fed, with many warning that it could undermine confidence in the central bank's ability to manage inflation and stabilize the economy. And let's not forget the optics here. While the Fed is running at a loss and the economy is struggling, Musk's DOGE team is busy shutting down agencies, downsizing workforces, and rifling through sensitive data with lax security protocols. Case in point, the Social Security Administration's online portals crashed after Musk's team got their hands on the system. If that's not a metaphor for government inefficiency, I don't know what is. So, what's the root of all this madness? It's simple: we have a government, and a central bank, that's completely out of touch with the economic realities facing everyday Americans. While the Fed is spending billions on renovations, families are struggling to pay their bills. While interest rates are crushing small businesses, the government is bickering over political control of the central bank. And while inflation continues to erode purchasing power, the people in charge seem more interested in saving face than solving problems. This isn't just a Fed problem, it's a systemic failure of leadership. The Biden administration kicked the can down the road on inflation, the Trump administration is playing fast and loose with institutional norms, and the Fed is stuck in the middle, making one bad call after another. The result? An economy that's on the brink of recession, with the Congressional Budget Office projecting GDP growth of just 1.2% in 2025, down from 2.5% in 2023. Meanwhile, unemployment is creeping up, hitting 4.8% in March 2025, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And don't even get me started on the federal deficit, which ballooned to $2.1 trillion in fiscal year 2024, thanks in part to the Fed's operating losses. Alright, folks, here's the Boss Economics World Hot Take: it's time for a reckoning. The Federal Reserve needs to get its house in order, literally and figuratively. Step 1. Cancel the $2.5 billion renovation and redirect that money to something that actually helps the economy, like small business relief or infrastructure investment. Step 2. Jerome Powell needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask himself if his leadership is up to the task. And Step 3. The government, both parties, needs to stop treating the Fed like a political football and let it do its job. But let's not hold our breath, because if there's one thing Washington excels at, it's screwing up the economy and then blaming everyone else. Until we get serious about holding our leaders accountable, we're stuck with more scandals, more waste, and more economic pain. So, there you have it, folks, the latest chapter in the ongoing saga of economic mismanagement, brought to you by the clowns in DC. If this doesn't make your blood boil, check your pulse, because you might be one of those 20 million alive people in the Social Security database who aren't. This is Boss Economics World, where we call it like we see it, and what we see right now is an economy on life support and a government asleep at the wheel. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe, and let's keep fighting the good fight against bad economic policy. Until next time, stay sharp, stay angry, and stay tuned.